Whether or not is going to look at the why before the what with Olga. And what I'm going to do here is, I can only show you so many things publicly because there's a lot behind our paywall. People pay for it, so they have to see it in commercial clients. But we jumped all over Olga on Thursday, and I was as visible as possible saying that we believed that this was going to cause 50, 60-mile-an-hour wind gust in New Orleans. Now, this storm has done more damage to New Orleans than any storm since Isaac back in 2012, 2011, 2012. So with that in mind, the question is, what happened? Well, I wasn't in any office except my own. So I'm going to show you what we put out here. We started putting out these tweets on the 24th saying that this was going to develop. So, and sure enough, it went from at this time when we said this, it's hard to see. When we said this, and I was kidding around, I said we're going to name it Flounder, that I'm going to name the storm myself, right? Flounder from Animal House, where Belushi just names things out of the clear blue sky. Well, the Weather Channel names winter storms, and the Hurricane Center names hurricanes. So I decided, well, they're not going to name this. I'd name it Flounder. And then it went up to 50% here, the probability, right? So they went from 20% to 50%. And then when this came out, the European, I explained in detail what was going to happen. That there'll be added convergence from the front trying to come into the storm. And you got to understand, situations like this in the Gulf of Mexico, and this was taught to me by someone way back in the 1960s, believe it or not. I was just a kid, and Bill Coffey was working at Atlantic City, New Jersey. And to me, it was Mr. Coffey. Now, there's four things Mr. Coffey knew. He knew the weather. Okay, he knew the horses. Right? He knew boxing and he knew football. And all four of those things, my dad was a meteorologist, so they were pretty good buddies over there. And, he tolerated me. But he said to me one day, Joey, you got to understand that fronts coming in and the situation with a tropical cyclone, they can be, if the front just arrives slowly, it could be like feeding a blanket into a fire and making it go off more. Now, what did he mean by that? Well, what happens is added wind comes in from the north over here and enhances the convergence with the storm, right? Now, the other thing is, if it comes in too strong, it overwhelms the storm. And this is only with weaker storms. The stronger the storm, the more it's going to get taken down by any intrusion of dry, cold air. But with these small mesoscale storms like this, the same situation that will weaken a big storm would enhance it. And so I've used this trick at least 10 times since I learned it from Mr. Coffey. Okay, that's not Joe DiMaggio. This is the Mr. And I always try to let people know where I got this from. And Mr. Coffey was a forecaster in World War II back then, and those guys, they knew their stuff inside and out. So in any case, it then carried it northeastward. So I said, this is going to be a major event in southeast Louisiana. And what I was doing was I was tweeting the observations out over the data buoys to explain that this was not weakening. And so we get here to the 25th, and they try to downgrade the storm at 10 o'clock at night, and they were downgrading it even as it went over this data buoy. Let's go wind 41 gusts to 66. The dew point, look at the dew point. The dew point rises as the center gets close, 79, and it's still 77, 76 with a northwest wind. There was no way that was not tropical. It had to be tropical at the center. Look at the wind. Look what the wind did. It went from east, southeast, southeast, southwest, right? Right? As the center passed, there was one period where it didn't report the wind. Then bang, out of the northwest, gusting to 66 miles an hour, right? What do you think that is? And so tweets were flying left and right. We've got only X amount of people that subscribe to Weather Bell. All right, and we wish more people would subscribe. It's 75 cents a day, and these YouTube things I do are just meant to be able to talk mostly about climate issues because I don't like dragging my company into that because of the way things are today. But my point is, I do get out in public and try to show people. And so what I did was I said, this is what we had from Thursday. We had the landfalling tropical storm, sustained winds of 40 knots, which is what this was, and it had gusts to 60 knots, which is 65 to 70 miles an hour. And then we kept it on Friday. So we had this. This was done before this was even upgraded to anything. Okay. So I was absolutely flabbergasted. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw uh, this explanation here saying there was nothing that showed it. That's not true. We were looking at what was showing it. First of all, the synoptic situation, which I'm 64 now, that I learned from people before me, before the age of computers, that was one thing. And two, the European was predicting it. I can't put the European on publicly. It's behind our paywall. But if you go and look at the posts that we had, it's 70, 75 mile an hour winds trying to come into southeast Louisiana. So the European actually had it. And then the last tweet here was saying, look, we had this from 2 days before. Now this was after the storm was well inland. So from 2 days before, we were showing what was going to go on. So I'm not in their office. I don't work at the Hurricane Center. I respect the daylights out of them. They are absolutely fanatically good with big storms. But these are the kind of things that from when I was a kid all the way through now that kept slipping through the cracks. Imelda was the same thing. If you were following me with Imelda, we were talking about that 2-3 days before this is going to develop right on the Texas coast. Now, I have clients in Houston. I have clients in New Orleans. I have clients on the Florida Panhandle for Nestor. I got clients in New England for Melissa, right? So I got all these, and all these systems were never supposed to become storms 2 days before, and yet they did. In addition, they developed in the areas that we talked about in the preseason. Scattershot season with most of the development outside of the main development region, and that's what you saw happen. You had Fernand in the Gulf, Imelda, Olga, Nestor. You had the major, Dorian, no question about it. There was one, right? They got to the Carolina coast as a category 1 or 2 or whatever it was, right? But the rest of them developed exactly in the fashion that we had pinpointed before the season. And so, you could go back and look at what we had. April 7th, we put that out. I didn't change it. One thing I was wrong on was the ACE index. It was higher. There was more activity than I thought this year. And I would have been more wrong if it wasn't from one of my assistants at Weatherbell who said, Joe, what if we get a slow moving or stalling hurricane? And I said, yeah, you're right. So I upped it. We actually had a couple of them that developed. And this stuff where we're naming stuff out in the Northeast Atlantic, listen, I don't mind you naming it, but it shouldn't be included in the seasons, the traditional tropical areas that we've judged tropical cyclones before. Okay, enough. You've had enough. All right. Sound like a curmudgeon here. I don't even know what that word means. It has more than one syllable. Enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.